Are you really marrying my dad, or is it still the pretend kind? Han Ji-ho asked it quietly, tugging the sleeve of Adai's Obi's borrowed gown behind a pillar strung with white orchids, ballroom noise rising around them like weather. He was 7, and he had learned this past year exactly which questions adults flinched from answering fast. Adai's knelt to his height instead of answering fast herself. Somewhere past the pillar, cameras were already turning toward his father's name. Go, you'll lose your shift. The old woman said it 3 times, waving Adai's away with a wet, trembling hand. Wooden wedding ducks scattered across the rain-black curb outside a hotel, packed with donors whose cars did not slow for her. Adai's knelt anyway, gathering carved wood from the gutter, while her earpiece crackled a warning she chose, for once, not to hear. Somewhere behind tinted glass, a man who had not yet stepped out of his car was already watching all of it. I need a fiancé for 6 months, not a real one. Han Do-yoon said it the way he said everything, evenly across a boardroom table wide enough to seat 12, sliding a folder toward a woman he had investigated without her permission and hired without yet asking her consent. Adai's did not touch the folder in front of her. There's a child in this, she said instead. Are you going to lie to a boy who already lost his mother? Tell them the truth, right now. Ji-ho said it loudly enough that the ballroom string quartet actually faltered, one small hand fisted in his father's jacket, while phones turned toward them and a headline about a paid fiancé blinked across 3 screens at once. Adai's had already started for the door before he spoke. What happened in the next 90 seconds would decide whether a 6-month contract had ever meant anything at all to any of the 3 of them. The rain over the Grand Hanul Hotel started thin and sideways, the kind Seoul produced in early autumn without warning, and by 6 o'clock, the covered drive was choked with black cars disgorging donors in gowns and dinner jackets for the Foundation's hospital wing gala. Valets moved between them like traffic cones come to life, umbrellas snapping open a half-second too late for half the guests, everyone hurrying because rain on silk was its own small emergency. Nobody hurried more visibly than Halmoni Sunja, an old woman with a wooden handcart of hand-carved wedding ducks she sold most evenings under the wedding hall's awning next door. Pairs of them, painted eyes, ribboned necks, sold to brides who wanted an old promise wrapped in new paper. Her cart's front wheel caught the curb wrong. It tipped in one long, almost graceful motion, and 40 carved birds spilled across wet asphalt and rolled toward the gutter, toward the tires of an idling sedan, toward the shoes of guests who stepped neatly around them without breaking stride. Adai's Obi came around the corner from the service entrance with 2 crates of stemware balanced against her hip, 4 years of catering shifts having taught her exactly how many minutes she had before her check-in scan closed the roster for the night. 6, this time, maybe 7, if Supervisor Yang was in a mood to forgive her. She saw the old woman on her knees on the wet pavement, reaching after a duck that was about to disappear under a car, and did the arithmetic anyway, the same fast, unwilling arithmetic she always did. 6 minutes, 1 job, 1 woman on the ground, nobody else was stopping for. She set the crates down against the wall, glass rattling inside them, and went to her without deciding to, the way you go toward some things before your reasons have finished catching up. The ducks themselves were small, plain, hand-sanded things, each pair carved to face one another with folded wooden wings, the kind of unglamorous craft easy to miss in a hurry, and easy to step over entirely if you were the sort of person already late for something more important. Adai's had never once been that kind of person, whatever it had cost her over the years, and she was not about to start being one tonight, of all nights in the rain. She was already running the numbers in her head as she crossed the drive, the way she ran numbers before every decision that mattered, minutes against money, a stranger's dignity against her own exhaustion, and she hated, a little, how automatic the calculation had become. Up close, Halmoni Sunja was smaller than she'd looked from across the drive, cheeks reddened by cold and embarrassment in equal measure, both hands shaking too hard to close around a single duck. "I'm fine," she said in Korean, sharp with the particular pride of someone used to managing on her own. "Go. You'll be late." Adai's crouched anyway, gathering 2 ducks into the crook of one arm, cold already biting through her uniform blazer, and looked past the woman's shoulder at the cart's front wheel, bent at an angle that meant it wasn't rolling anywhere under its own power again tonight. A 3rd duck, one Adai's hadn't reached yet, sat directly in the path of a black sedan, easing forward while its driver's attention stayed fixed on a valet waving him toward the next open bay. "Wait," Adeyezi said, and lunged for it without entirely thinking the movement through, snatching the small carved bird out from under the sedan's tire with perhaps 4 inches of asphalt to spare, close enough that the driver leaned on his horn a full second after the danger had already passed. Halmoni Sunja made a small, sharp sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a scolding, and gripped Adese's sleeve once she was back within reach, as if to confirm for herself that the younger woman was actually in one piece. "Reckless," the old woman said, though something in her voice had softened around the edges. "I said go." "You said you were fine," Adoya said, brushing wet grit off the duck's painted wing before setting it carefully back among the others. "You're not. Your cart's not going anywhere on that wheel, and I'm not leaving a woman sitting on wet ground because I'm worried about a shift." She said it more certainly than she felt it. The shift's 90 minutes and the rent due in 11 days both very much still present at the back of her mind. Anne glanced up in time to see her supervisor's name flash across her earpiece display, unanswered for the second time in under a minute. She silenced the buzz against her wrist without looking at it directly, and turned back to the last few ducks scattered near the curb, working faster now, aware that every second spent explaining herself to Yang was a second not spent making sure Halmoni Sunja actually made it off the wet ground in one piece before anything else about the evening got to matter more than that. "Oh," the hotel's head valet reached the spilled cart before Adese did, and swore under his breath, not at the mess, but at the timing. A line of town cars already backing up behind the stalled sedan, headlights doubling in the wet dark. "Move her back from the doors," he told a junior in passing, already turning to wave the next car forward, and that was the whole of what he offered anyone that evening. A donor's assistant in a sharp black suit, phone lit against his ear, stepped over 2 ducks lying directly in his path without appearing to register. They existed at all, still narrating some number into the rain. A security guard crouched near the entrance, glanced at the old woman on the ground, and suggested not unkindly that she move along. It doesn't look right for the cameras, as though scattered wooden birds were a stain to be cleared, rather than a person's whole evening rolling toward a storm drain. Nobody was cruel about it, exactly. That was, Adese would think later, almost worse than cruelty. The sheer practiced ease with which busy people could look directly at trouble and keep walking, each one certain someone else would handle it before it became their problem. She didn't say anything to any of them. She crouched instead, working fast and methodical, plucking ducks from the gutter 2 and 3 at a time, wiping each dry against her apron before setting it back into the cart's ruined frame, learning as she went which ones had cracked in the fall and which had only lost their painted ribbons in the water. Halmoni? Sunja had gone quiet in the specific way of someone rationing what strength remained to her, hands still trembling too hard to be any real help, murmuring apologies in Korean that Adese answered with the handful of reassuring phrases 4 years in this city had slowly taught her. Behind them both, unnoticed, a black SUV eased into the loading bay and stopped at an angle that blocked no one, its engine idling, its rear window not yet lowered at all. A hotel photographer hired for the gala swept past with his camera already raised toward the arriving donors, framing the shot exactly around the scattered ducks and the 2 women kneeling among them without once pressing the shutter, because none of it, to him, looked like anything worth remembering for the Foundation's glossy program later that year. Even the donors who slowed for half a step did so only long enough to make certain their own shoes were clear of the wreckage, murmuring something vaguely sympathetic toward the pavement, before continuing on into the warm, dry lobby without ever actually stopping. Her earpiece had been buzzing for 2 full minutes before Adese finally answered it, Halmoni Sunja's cart nearly righted. Most of the ducks recovered and stacked in neat rows. "Obi, where are you?" Supervisor Yang's voice arrived flat and already furious, the particular fury of a man with 50 covers to seat and 0 patience left for explanations he hadn't asked for. "West Drive," she said, still crouched, still working with one hand. "There's a woman down out here. Her cart tipped. That is not your job." He said it the way he said most things, as though the words themselves were doing her a favor by being brief. "You clock in 90 seconds, or I cross you off the roster. I mean it this time. You know exactly what this season's shifts are worth to you." She did know. She knew it in the specific, unglamorous arithmetic she ran most nights on the subway home. Rent, the wire transfer to her mother in Lagos on the 15th of every month, 4 more semesters of her brother Kalechi's pharmacy tuition still owed, the hospitality certificate she was paying for in installments she sometimes had to skip entirely. 90 seconds. She looked down at the old woman's hands, still shaking too hard to hold a cup of water steady, and made her choice with the flat, unglamorous speed of someone who had made hard choices before and had learned that dwelling on them only made them heavier afterward. "Cross me off then," she said, and set the earpiece to silent before Yang could answer, before she could hear herself agree with the part of her, already calculating how she'd cover this month's shortfall. The rain kept falling, fine and cold, running down the back of her collar as she finished setting the last ducks upright. And somewhere close behind her, a car door she did not turn to look at opened very quietly and did not close again right away. Somewhere above her, dimly, she registered the shape of a man stepping out into the rain without an umbrella, unhurried in a way none of the evening's other guests had managed all night, though she was far too occupied with the last of the ducks to spare him more than half a glance before turning back to her work. Whoever he was, he did not offer to help either, and some tired, practical part of her filed that away too, alongside the valet and the assistant and the guard, one more well-dressed shape choosing to watch rather than kneel. By the time Halmoni Sunja's granddaughter arrived, 20 minutes, 3 unanswered calls, and 1 favor asked of a stranger's phone later, the rain had eased to a mist, and Adaise's uniform blazer had gone from wet to simply cold all the way through. She had walked the old woman and the mended cart under the arcade's covered walkway, wrapped the recovered ducks in a plastic tablecloth pulled from her own crate to keep the last of the damp off them, and sat on the low wall beside her the whole time, not because there was anything more useful left to do, but because leaving suddenly felt like the wrong kind of efficient. When the granddaughter's small car finally pulled up, full of apologies and relief, Halmoni Sunja gripped Adaise's wrist before letting herself be helped up, surprisingly strong for someone who had been shaking an hour earlier in the rain. "Wait," she said, and reached into the tablecloth bundle, working one duck free with fingers that had gone steady again. A small one, unpainted plain pale wood, with only the eyes and folded wings carved into it, no ribbon at all. She pressed it into Adaise's palm and closed the younger woman's fingers around it before she could think to refuse. "Small thing," the old woman said. "Cheap wood, but it keeps a promise. That's the whole point of it. Whatever a girl your age needs it to keep for her." She patted Adaise's hand once, dry humor flickering through the exhaustion in her face. "You clearly don't have one yet. Take it." Adaise laughed despite herself, despite the roster she'd just lost, despite the cold soaking through to her skin, and slipped the duck into her coat pocket without quite deciding to keep it, the way a person keeps something before they understand the weight of it. She watched the little car pull away into traffic, then stood alone under the arcade for a moment, badge already flashing a soft, apologetic red when she tapped it uselessly against the staff entrance sensor, locked, exactly as promised. She had known it would be. She started walking toward the subway instead, coat collar up, 3 months of careful budgeting rearranging itself in her head, entirely unaware that 15 feet away, behind glass she had never once looked toward, someone had watched all 20 minutes of it without checking his phone a single time. She would think, much later, that the whole encounter had lasted less than half an hour from start to finish, and that half an hour had somehow managed to cost her a season's wages, a dry uniform, and any illusion she'd still been holding on to that kindness, in this particular city, generally came free of consequence. Inside the SUV, Han Do-yoon had missed the call to enter through the north doors precisely 4 minutes ago, and Secretary Moon, standing outside with an umbrella and a face carefully arranged around his growing alarm, had stopped reminding him about it roughly 2 minutes ago, having correctly read that his employer was not, at that moment, available for reminders of any kind. Do-yoon had watched the entire sequence without meaning to. A woman in catering blacks putting down crates she could not afford to abandon, crouching in the rain for a stranger, while a valet, an assistant, and a security guard each found their own reason to keep moving. He had watched her mute what was clearly a losing argument in her ear, rather than leave the old woman half-helped on the wet ground. He had watched her wait 20 full minutes for a granddaughter she owed nothing at all to, and laugh, once, briefly, at something the old woman said before her badge failed at the staff door, exactly as she must have known it would. It was not, Do-yun would think later, trying to explain it to himself in language that made sense, that he had been searching for anything that evening beyond simply getting through a gala he would have preferred to skip entirely. It was that he had spent 14 months surrounded by people who agreed with him before he'd finished a sentence, and here was someone who had just made herself unemployed for a woman she'd never met, for reasons that had clearly not included being watched by anyone at all. "Sir," Secretary Moon, finally, gently, from the open car door. "They're waiting for your remarks." Do-yun watched the woman in the black coat disappear around the corner toward the subway entrance, hands in her pockets, walking like someone doing arithmetic she would rather not be doing tonight. He got out of the car. "Find her name," he said, low, adjusting one cufflink as he turned toward the hotel's lit doors. The whole weight of a decision he hadn't fully made yet already settling into his voice before he'd finished the sentence. "Before the wing is dedicated, I don't care what it costs the investigation budget to do it properly." Secretary Moon said nothing further, already reaching for his own phone to begin the search before they'd even crossed the threshold into the ballroom's noise and light, understanding the way a good assistant understands most things without being told twice, that this particular instruction was not one his employer intended to repeat. 1 week later, an unknown number called Adayez 3 times before she picked up, certain it was a scam, until the voice on the other end used her full name and the exact address of the boarding house she had moved into after losing the Grand Hanul roster entirely. She arrived at the Han Bio Group Tower expecting, at absolute best, a complaint about the gala, and was instead walked past 4 separate security checkpoints into a boardroom with a table long enough to seat 12, at the end of which sat the man from the SUV. She recognized him instantly now, the tinted glass finally accounted for, introduced to her formally as Han Do-yun, chairman of the very company whose name was on the hospital wing she'd watched from a service entrance a week before. "You had me investigated," she said, before he could speak first, having decided on the drive up that she would not let this conversation happen entirely on his terms alone. "Background, employment history, immigration status, without asking me." "Yes," Do-yun said, offering no cushioning, no apology dressed up as an explanation. "I needed to know who you were before I asked you something I could not afford to ask the wrong person." He slid a folder across the table, 12 feet of polished wood between them. Deliberate, she was fairly sure, the way everything about this particular room seemed deliberate. "I need a fiancé, for 6 months publicly, starting before the wing's dedication. Not a real one." Adayez did not touch the folder in front of her. She looked instead at the amount typed on the single visible page, enough to clear 4 semesters of Kalechi's tuition outright, enough to make the arithmetic she ran every night on the subway simply stop cold, and felt something furious rise under the number's obvious pull. "You watched a woman help someone in the rain," she said, and decided that made her available for purchase. "No," Do-yun said, and for the first time something in his controlled voice shifted, fractionally, toward visible effort. "I watched someone do a costly unwitnessed thing correctly and thought, for the first time in longer than I would like to admit, that I finally knew exactly who to ask." Adayez sat down then, finally, not because the number on the page had convinced her of anything in particular, but because she recognized with some reluctance that she wanted to hear the rest of whatever this was before deciding anything at all, and sitting down seemed like the more honest way to admit that much to herself. She almost left. She stood, actually, folder still closed on the table, coat half back on one shoulder, and made it as far as the door's brushed steel handle before Do-yun spoke again, not to stop her exactly, only to finish a sentence he apparently felt she deserved to hear complete before she walked out. In the 2 seconds it took her hand to close around that handle, she made herself do the accounting properly, out loud in her own head, the way she had learned to do with anything that looked too easy at first glance. The number on that page cleared 4 semesters of Kalechi's tuition outright and 6 months of not lying awake over exchange rates, yes, but it also meant standing in rooms full of strangers who would assume, correctly or not, that she had simply been bought for the season. It meant her own name printed beside a stranger's, in a newspaper, for reasons that had nothing at all to do with love. And worst of all, unavoidably, It meant looking a grieving 7-year-old boy in the eye and letting him believe in something that had, underneath the warmth, a price tag stapled quietly to the back of it. She made herself hold all 3 costs at once, weighing them like stones in her palm before she let her hand finally drop from the handle. "There is a 7-year-old in this," he said. "My son. I would not be asking anyone this if there weren't." Aday's turned around slowly. "Then you're asking me to lie to a child who's already lost his mother," she said, flat, the accusation she'd been holding since the folder first crossed the table between them. "That's not a business term, that's a person. I know exactly what it is." No defensiveness in it, which surprised her more than an argument would have. "I'm not asking you to pretend with him. I'll tell Jiho the truth, in terms a 7-year-old can hold, that this is an arrangement, that it's temporary, that you're someone he's allowed to trust, regardless of how it ends between us." She came back to the table, but she did not sit down. "Then, here are my terms, not yours," she said, and watched him actually reach for a pen rather than argue with her about it. "A fixed end date, written down, no extending it quietly later. Wages, not a gift. I want a contract that says exactly what this is, so nobody ever gets to call it something uglier than it is. I will not perform affection for cameras beyond what's necessary to be believed, and never, under any circumstance, more than that in front of your son. And the moment, the exact moment, this stops being good for that boy, I walk, contract or no contract, and you don't get a say in it." Do-yoon wrote each condition down himself, in small, precise handwriting, and slid the pen across those same 12 feet of table once he'd finished, without a single addition of his own attached. "Agreed," he said, "all of it." Adais picked up the pen. In her coat pocket, forgotten until her hand brushed it, reaching for her own signature, sat a small, unpainted wooden duck that had, until this exact moment, meant nothing about promises at all. Outside the tall windows, the city had gone fully dark while they talked. 1,000 small lit windows scattered across Seoul, like something spilled and not yet gathered back up again. And Adez found herself thinking, absurdly, of 40 wooden ducks scattered across wet asphalt only a week before. Han Ji-ho had heard the word fiancé exactly twice before meeting Adez. Once from his grandmother's raised voice through a closed study door, once from his father, gently at breakfast, explaining in the careful edited sentences adults used when they thought a 7-year-old couldn't hear the parts they'd deliberately left out. Someone new was coming to spend time with them. She might, eventually, become family. It was an arrangement for now, and Jiho was old enough, his father said, to be told that much honestly at least. Jiho had nodded, eaten his rice, and privately decided, based on the specific evasive weight adults put on the word arrangement, that this meant fake, the same way his class hamster had been a temporary classroom guest, right up until it went home with someone permanently instead. He met her in the penthouse's front hall, arms crossed, chin up, and asked the only question he actually cared about, hearing answered. "Are you the fake one?" Adois, to her credit, did not flinch or laugh or crouch down to deliver some soft, dishonest reassurance about it. "I'm the one your dad hired," she said. "You can decide for yourself what that makes me." It was, Jiho would think much later, the first completely honest answer any adult had given him about any part of it. And it bought her more trust in 4 seconds than a year of gentle lies from anyone else would have managed. Over the following weeks, a routine assembled itself, without either of them quite planning it. She picked him up from school on the days his usual staff were reassigned, rode the subway with him twice because the driver was stuck in traffic, and Jiho, delighted, had never once been underground in his own life, taught him to fold Gary into a proper ball while he taught her, gravely, the correct order for dumpling pleats. He tested her constantly, in small ways only a 7-year-old would think to test an adult. And she kept passing every single time without appearing to notice she was being examined at all. His grandmother, when she heard about the subway ride secondhand from Secretary Moon, was reportedly not amused by it, though Jiho himself brought it up at dinner for a full week afterward, informing anyone who would listen exactly which line had the best view of the river between 2 particular stations. By the 3rd week, Adez had memorized things about Jiho's life she hadn't technically been hired to know. That he labeled his own rain boots left and right in permanent marker because he'd once put them on backward at a school assembly and been laughed at for it. that he refused instant noodles on principle but ate 3 bowls of her jollof rice without a single complaint about the spice, that his English homework sat untouched in his bag most nights, because his mother, before she died, had been the one who read to him in English, and some part of him had apparently decided that continuing without her felt like a kind of forgetting he wasn't ready for yet. A daze started reading with him anyway, 1 chapter a night, sitting on the edge of his bed with the lamp turned low, not mentioning what she suspected, letting him set the pace of it entirely himself. He complained about her accent on certain words. She complained right back about his refusal to admit that jollof rice was objectively superior to whatever bland Korean stew he was pretending to prefer that particular week. And he laughed, actually laughed, the first time she'd heard it from him, hard enough that he lost his page in the book. Laundry day became a fixed ritual, folding his small uniforms into stacks, while he narrated increasingly elaborate stories about school. Grocery runs turned into a standing argument over which vegetables he was and wasn't willing to eat. An argument he lost every single time and pretended, loudly, not to have lost at all. None of it was in the contract. None of it had a line item written anywhere. She noticed herself noticing that, one evening, folding a tiny sock into a tinier ball and pushed the thought away before it could finish forming, the way you push away weather you're not yet prepared to be caught in. What she did not notice, not for several more weeks, was how deliberately Jiho had begun engineering these evenings for himself, forgetting his English workbook in the kitchen instead of his room, so she'd have to come find him there, insisting, with total 7-year-old innocence, that only she was allowed to pack his lunch because she did the rice right, timing his small homework crises for exactly the hour his father usually got home from the office. He was not, whatever the adults around him assumed, a bystander in any part of this. From the hallway, unseen by either of them, Han Do-yoon stood a full minute longer than his errand actually required, watching his son laugh at a joke about vegetables, before he made himself walk on toward his study. It was a small thing, noticing that, and he told himself so twice on the way to his desk, though it followed him through an hour of reports he read without absorbing a single figure from any of them that night. Namni. It began, if Do-yoon was honest with himself, as an accident of scheduling, one late meeting cut short. One evening he happened to arrive home before Jiho's bedtime, instead of well after it, and found his own kitchen table, which he mostly recalled as a surface for unopened mail, occupied by his son and a Daisy arguing cheerfully over a diagram of the water cycle for a school project. Rice cooling, forgotten between them both. He sat down without quite deciding to do it. Nobody commented on it, which somehow made the whole thing stranger still. The accident repeated itself the following week, and the one after that, until Secretary Moon began quietly clearing his 6 o'clock calendar without being asked to, and Do-yoon found he no longer minded being teased about it. Adayaz had a habit of noting, dryly, exactly how many nights in a row he'd accidentally made it home for dinner. A running joke that had, by the 4th week, become something closer to a fixed appointment neither of them bothered naming as one out loud. It was a small thing, a rainy Saturday, that undid him a little more than he expected. Jiho had been assigned to draw his family for a school project, a common enough assignment, one Do-yoon had dreaded quietly since it was first announced, uncertain how his son would render the shape of a family with one member visibly missing from it. Jiho drew 3 figures instead of 2, himself, his father, and a taller woman with dark curling hair, labeled simply A in his careful 7-year-old print. He showed it to Adaze first for her approval of the coloring choices. He showed it to his father, second, entirely unaware of what he'd just quietly done to the room. Do-yoon said the drawing was very good and excused himself to the balcony for exactly the length of time it took to no longer trust his own voice completely, thinking of his wife only briefly, gently, in the specific way grief eventually allows, if you let it, not as an ambush, but as a fact, standing quietly beside a new one he hadn't yet found the words for. He did not mention the drawing to Adaze that evening, or the following one either, though he found himself, without quite planning it, replacing the wine at dinner with the barley tea Jiho preferred, a small adjustment nobody but the boy seemed to notice, and nobody at all remarked on out loud. The school's family day fell on a morning Do-yoon had a board vote he could not reschedule, a fact he explained to Jiho the night before, with the specific apologetic formality he used whenever work collided with something that mattered more to his son, and Jiho had nodded in the resigned way children learn early when their parents run companies instead of ordinary jobs like everyone else's parents. Adaze went instead, without being asked twice, wearing the one blazer she owned that didn't have a catering company's logo stitched above the pocket, and sat through 40 minutes of second-grade presentations about family trees, with the particular attentiveness of someone determined not to embarrass a boy who'd already had enough quietly taken from him. It was during the applause for Jiho's presentation, 3 figures, carefully colored, his father's name and hers both written underneath in shaky marker, that a classmate's mother, not unkindly, not even quietly, asked Jiho whether the woman with him was the housekeeper or something, loud enough for the row behind to hear it clearly, curious rather than cruel, and somehow worse for it. Jiho went rigid where he stood. Adaze answered before he had to say anything at all. "I'm the person he asked to be here," she said evenly, no heat in it, no apology either, and left the woman to decide for herself what the meant exactly, the same way she'd once answered Jiho's own harder question in the front hall. Do-yoon arrived at the tail end, having left the vote at its first possible break, in time only to see his son's shoulders come down from around his ears and Adaze's hand rest briefly on the boy's head before pulling back again. He said nothing about it in the car afterward. He thought about it for the rest of the afternoon, in the gaps between agenda items, in a way that had nothing at all to do with the merger being discussed around him. And that evening, watching her laugh at something Jiho said over dinner, he came within one held breath of saying something neither of them was quite ready to hear yet, and said instead that the rice needed a little more salt. Adaze added the salt without comment, watching him from the corner of her eye the entire time, and decided, privately, that whatever he'd almost said instead could wait exactly as long as he needed it to, though she suspected, correctly as it turned out, that it would not be very much longer now. Jiho, oblivious to whatever had just passed silently over his head, asked for a second helping, and the ordinary noise of dinner closed back over the moment like water over a stone. The summons came in the form of a handwritten note rather than a phone call, which Do-yoon told her, with unusual gravity, meant a great deal more from his mother than any amount of advance planning ever would have. Han Soon-young received her in the family's private Hanok annex behind the corporate tower, a low wooden building of sliding doors and a walled garden that seemed to belong to an entirely different century than the glass structure looming behind it, and poured the tea herself before asking a single question, a courtesy Adaze understood, correctly, as its own kind of test. "Tell me about your mother," Sun-young said, which was not remotely the question Adaze had braced herself for on the drive over. She answered honestly anyway, a market stall in Lagos, a father who left early, a brother whose tuition mattered more some months than her own rent did, and watched the older woman listen without softening her expression once through any of it. "And you understand," Sun-young said eventually, setting down her cup with precise, deliberate quiet, "that whatever this arrangement is, it ends. My son has told me the terms. I want to know that you understand them as well as he claims you do." "I wrote most of them," Adaze said. Something flickered across Sun-young's face, not quite surprise, not quite approval, something adjacent to both at once. "Then you understand there is a foundation dedication in 6 weeks, Sun-young continued, "a board watching for any sign that my son is unstable, and a boy who has already lost one mother figure and cannot survive losing the appearance of a second. However temporary you both insist, this is between yourselves." She let the silence after that sentence do its own work, watching Adaze across the low table with the flat, appraising attention of someone who had built and defended a company for 30 years running. "Unichoi's family expected an announcement by spring," she added, almost idly, testing for a reaction Adaze declined entirely to give her. Adaze picked up her own cup, drank without hurrying, and said only, "I'm not here for your approval, chairwoman. I'm here because of your grandson. I'll leave the moment I'm not good for him, contract or not. That part isn't negotiable, not even with you." Sun-young refilled both cups without a word, an unhurried, deliberate gesture that Adaze understood only later, walking back out past the walled garden, as the closest thing to acknowledgement the chairwoman was ever likely to offer anyone on a first meeting, let alone one conducted almost entirely on Adaze's own terms. Sun-young did not answer immediately. and Adaze had learned enough in 1 hour of this woman's company not to fill the silence for her out of nerves. "Do you know what you would be taking on?" Sun Young said finally. "If this stopped being an arrangement, not the money, the rest of it, my son's name attached to yours in every paper in this country, a board that will look for any reason at all to call you unfit, a boy who will need you to still be there in 10 years, not 6 months. Most people, faced honestly with that list, would rather keep the fiction and simply take the payment instead. I already told your son the moment it isn't real," Adaze said. "I walk. I meant that about the contract. I'd mean it about the rest of it too, if there ever were a rest of it, which there isn't. So I'm not entirely sure why we're discussing hypotheticals. It was," she realized a half-second too late, "close to insubordinate for a room like this one." And she watched Sun Young's mouth do something that was almost, briefly, genuinely amused by it. "Good," the older woman said, unexpectedly. "I've spent a year watching women agree with everything I say in this room. It's exhausting to sit through. My own daughter-in-law never once managed it, and I loved her for several other reasons instead." She rose, signaling the audience's end with the same economy she'd used to begin it an hour earlier, and paused at the sliding door before Adaze could stand to follow. "The wing dedication is in 6 weeks, Sun Young said. You'll attend publicly, as arranged. Yuna Choi's family will be there, expecting an announcement of a rather different kind entirely. And I would advise you to understand exactly what that means before you walk into that ballroom smiling at anyone." She left before Adaze could ask her to explain further, sliding the door shut behind her with a small, definitive sound. And Adaze sat alone in the quiet Hanok for a long moment afterward, turning the wooden duck over inside her coat pocket without taking it out, feeling, for the first time since signing the contract, genuinely uncertain of what exactly she'd agreed to walk into. Outside, the tower's glass face had gone the color of the evening sky, and she sat there a while longer than the tea itself required, listening to a garden she could not see, settle into whatever quiet gardens settle into, once the last visitor of the day has finally gone home. The Han Foundation Pediatric Wing opened on a clear evening 6 weeks later. Glass and marble and a ribbon, nobody actually cut with scissors. Donors circulating under chandeliers in the same ballroom Adaze had once watched from a service entrance in the rain, months earlier. She wore a gown the foundation's stylist had chosen and altered without asking her opinion twice. Stood beside Do Yoon through 40 minutes of photographs and handshakes with names she'd never remember afterward, and found the whole evening easier to bear than she'd expected. Mostly because Jiho refused to leave her side, introducing her to every classmate whose family had been dragged along with total unguarded sincerity as "my dad's fiancée, Adaze." No hedging, no air quotes, no evasive adult phrasing left in it at all anymore. She had stopped weeks ago, correcting him about it. Across the room, Yuna Choi watched the introduction happen for the 4th time that evening, her own smile fixed carefully in place. The particular stillness of someone doing arithmetic of her own kind. A merger her family had assumed would come bundled with a wedding. A match. Sun Young had never quite promised, but never quite denied either. Now, visibly, publicly, not happening at all. She did not confront anyone about it. She simply excused herself early, phone already in hand, and Adaze, watching her go, felt the first cold thread of unease she couldn't yet name settle somewhere under the borrowed gown's fabric. Reporter Bayek arrived an hour later, credentialed as press, moving through the crowd with the specific patient attentiveness of someone who already knew exactly what question he intended to ask, and precisely who he intended to ask it in front of. Adaze noticed him twice before she understood what she was even noticing, a man who kept his phone angled toward her, and Do Yoon, a half-second longer than any of the other press did that night, who seemed to already know things about the evening that hadn't officially been announced yet. She mentioned it to no one. There was, she told herself, still champagne and photographs and Jiho tugging her toward the dessert table, and whatever unease she was carrying could surely wait until after that. She did not yet know Yuna Choi's name or the specific shape of the deal, riding on a wedding that had never actually been promised to anyone. Only the small, accumulating certainty that something in the room had shifted in the last hour, the way weather shifts before anybody can name the coming rain. She caught Do Yoon's eye once across the crowd, and found him already watching her, which steadied her more than she was willing to admit to herself just then. and she let Jiho pull her toward the next introduction instead of dwelling on it any further. IT started as a ripple, the way these things always do. A phone lighting up in someone's hand near the bar. A whisper passed between two women in green and gold. A headline someone read aloud in a voice not quite low enough for the room. Han Group heirs fiancé, reportedly under a 6-month contract, sources cite paid arrangement. Reporter Bayek had his phone out and his question ready before Do-yoon even registered the shift in the room's noise, angling himself directly into a Daisy's path with the practiced ease of a man who'd cornered worse people than a caterer turned fiancé before tonight. "Is it true you're being paid for this?" he asked, loudly enough to carry across half the ballroom. "A contract, sources say. An end date. Does the boy know any of it?" Jiho had suspected quietly for months the word arrangement, the careful gaps in his father's honesty, a half-heard argument through a study door late one night, but suspecting a thing and hearing it announced across a ballroom full of strangers turned out to be two entirely different kinds of injury. He watched Adaise's face go still in the specific way adults' faces went still, right before they told a careful lie. And something in him refused, absolutely refused, to let that happen to her, or to him, one more single time. He set down his plate. He walked into the middle of the widening circle of phones and whispers, 7 years old and furious in the clean, uncomplicated way only children manage that clearly, and found his father's eyes across the crowded room. "Just tell them the truth," Jiho said, loud enough that the string quartet actually faltered mid-phrase, one small hand fisting in the air before he thought better of it and let it drop to his side. "Right now, I'm tired of everybody being so careful about it, except me." The ballroom went, for one full second, completely silent. 40 phones angled toward a 7-year-old who had just said, out loud and in public, the one thing every adult in the room had spent an entire evening carefully not saying at all. Reporter Bayek, to his evident surprise, did not get the follow-up quote he'd clearly come hoping for that night. Nobody in that circle of guests was looking at their phones anymore, not even his own. Every face in the ballroom turned instead toward a boy who had simply refused, point blank, to let the evening end in careful half-truths. Sun Young reached her son before anyone else could, one hand closing around his forearm with the particular grip she'd used his entire life to redirect him away from mistakes he was about to make in public. "A statement," she said, low and fast, already steering him toward the side corridor, where the Foundation's lawyers were no doubt already assembling themselves. "Calm, brief, we control the framing before Beck files anything else tonight. We can end the arrangement quietly and—" "No," Do-yoon said, and stopped walking entirely, which was, for a man who had spent his entire adult life doing precisely what his mother suggested, in exactly the order she suggested it, its own small earthquake in that corridor. Behind him, through the doorway, he could see Adaze standing very still near the dessert table, Jiho's hand now gripped fiercely in hers, both of them watching him with an expression he recognized uncomfortably, as the same one he'd worn waiting for difficult news in a hospital corridor 2 years earlier. Adaze, for her part, was doing arithmetic of an entirely different kind altogether. She had been humiliated in worse rooms than this one, had survived worse men than reporter Bayek asking her worse questions, and none of it had ever once required her to stay and find out how the story actually ended. She could walk. The contract's terms, the ones she'd written herself, gave her every right to do exactly that. What stopped her, standing there with Jiho's small, furious hand locked around hers, was the specific, unwelcome recognition that she no longer wanted to know whether any of it had mattered because a contract obligated her to find out. She wanted to know because she'd stopped. At some point, she couldn't name precisely, being able to imagine simply not knowing at all. "I'm not walking into a side room to be managed," she said, when Do-yoon's eyes finally found hers across the ballroom, quiet enough that only he and Sun Young, still gripping his arm, could actually hear it. "If you have something true to say it out there, in front of the people who just heard the lie. Otherwise, I'm taking your son home, and you can find out tomorrow whether either of us is still speaking to you at all." Sun Young released her son's arm slowly, watching him cross back toward the ballroom doorway with an expression Adaze could not entirely read from that distance. Something caught between old habit and a reluctant, unfamiliar respect for a decision she had plainly not authorized in advance. Do-yoon walked back into the ballroom rather than down the side corridor, which was the first decision Sun-young had watched him make against her direct advice in longer than either of them could easily recall together. He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to raise his voice to be heard in a room, and he saw no reason to start now, in front of 40 phones, and a reporter clearly hoping for exactly that kind of collapse from him. "The contract is real," he said, into a silence that had been waiting for precisely this sentence since Jiho first broke it open. "It started 6 weeks ago as a business arrangement because my mother and this board needed to see stability before tonight, and I was not honest enough at the time to find a better way through that than hiring someone entirely." He found Adaizi across the room before he continued, and did not look away from her while he said the rest of it aloud. "It stopped being that for me somewhere around a rainy Saturday and a drawing of 3 people. I don't know the exact date it happened. I know it happened before I was willing to admit it, even to myself. And I know that whatever Yoona Choi's family expected from tonight, it was never going to include a wedding, arranged or otherwise. That was never something I promised anyone, including my own mother." Jiho, still gripping Adaizi's hand, added his own line into the stunned quiet that followed, entirely unprompted, in the flat, devastating honesty of a 7-year-old who had simply been waiting for an adult to catch up to something he'd decided months earlier. "She's not fake anymore," he announced to the room at large, as though settling a minor dispute between children. "She stopped being fake a while ago. Everybody just kept saying the wrong word for it this whole time." Adaiz crossed the room slowly, aware of every phone still angled toward her, and stopped in front of Do-yoon without falling into anything as easy as his arms right there. "I'll think about staying," she said, quiet enough that it belonged only to the 3 of them, despite the crowd around them. "Not as something you rescued tonight. Only if it's an actual choice going forward on equal ground. Otherwise, this becomes a different kind of arrangement, and I already told you exactly how I feel about those." Somewhere behind them both, reporter Beck lowered his phone for the first time all evening, having gotten, in the end, an entirely different story than the one he'd arrived to write, and found himself, against every professional instinct he owned, quietly deciding not to be the one to ruin it. 6 weeks later, Ado signed a lease of her own, a small commercial kitchen space 2 subway stops from the penthouse, the first real step toward the catering company she'd been sketching on napkins for 2 years, and never quite managed to afford starting on her own. Do-yoon had not paid for it, a fact she'd made him confirm twice before she'd let him anywhere near the paperwork at all. He had instead spent one long afternoon with his company's legal team untangling the visa and licensing knots that had stalled her application for 8 months, removing an obstacle rather than delivering a gift, exactly the distinction she'd insisted on from the very first folder he'd ever slid across a boardroom table toward her. The contract itself had quietly expired somewhere in the paperwork of that same week, unrenewed, unmentioned by either of them, its fixed end date arriving and passing, with neither remarking on it, because by then it had long since stopped being the document that explained what they actually were to each other. Halmoni Sunja came to Jiho's birthday gathering at Adaizi's own invitation, setting up a small folding table of carved ducks near the kitchen's front window, the way she once had outside the Grand Hanul, delighted and faintly smug, to discover exactly whose household she'd wandered into months earlier without ever knowing it at the time. "I told you it keeps a promise," she said to Adaizi, entirely unsurprised, accepting a bowl of jollof rice with the same brisk dignity she'd once refused help with in the rain. Jiho, cross-legged on the floor nearby, was carefully arranging a small collection of things on the windowsill above the party. A photograph, a folded drawing of 3 figures, and the single unpainted wooden duck that had lived quietly in Adaizi's coat pocket for months before finally coming to rest somewhere. It could be looked at every single day instead. Supervisor Yang, invited on something of a whim, spent most of the afternoon pretending not to be impressed by the kitchen's layout, and left, eventually, with a container of jollof rice and a grudging offer of a reference letter, should Adaizi's new company ever need one from him. Do-yoon found her in the kitchen afterward, rinsing bowls while the party's noise carried on, without either of them for a moment, and set something small and wrapped in plain paper on the counter beside her hands. "Halmoni Sunja carved it," he said, when she only looked at it rather than opening it right away. I asked her, about a month ago. She told me a pair is the whole point of them. One duck by itself was never actually finished. It was only ever half of something else. She seemed to think you already knew that, and we're just waiting to see if anyone else would eventually figure it out too. Adaz unwrapped it slowly, drying her hands first, and found a second wooden duck, unpainted like the first one. Its wings carved to fold against its mates, exactly the way the old tradition required. Two shapes meant to sit together and mean something neither could mean, entirely alone. She didn't say anything for a moment. From the doorway, Jiho appeared, uninvited as always to conversations he considered his own business, took the new duck out of her hands without asking permission, and carried it solemnly to the windowsill to set it beside the first one, adjusting their angle twice until he was fully satisfied they were properly paired at last. "There," he announced, dusting off his hands like a job well finished. "Now, it's not fake, and it's not half of anything either." Do-Yun did not propose that night. No ring, no speech, understanding correctly that Adaz would have found either premature, and said so immediately to his face. He asked her instead whether she'd consider Tuesdays as a standing dinner at his table, not because a contract required it anymore, but because he'd apparently gotten used to the specific sound of her arguing with his son about vegetables, and found he had no real intention of giving it up now. Adaz said that could probably be arranged on the condition he finally admit jollof rice was better than whatever bland stew he kept pretending to prefer. Outside the window, the two wooden ducks sat together in the last of the evening light, a promise that had taken the long way around to finally being kept. Jiho climbed onto a stool between them to inspect his handiwork on the windowsill one final time, declared the ducks officially acceptable, and asked, with the same total sincerity he brought to everything, whether this meant he could finally stop explaining to his classmates what fake fiancé meant, since apparently nobody at school believed him about any of it anymore anyway. If you've ever wondered what it costs to help a stranger with nothing left over to spare, and what it can quietly grow into, months later, when you least expect it, tell me in the comments, because I would love to know. And if this story stayed with you tonight, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are more nights like this one still waiting to be told,